Okay. Sorry, I had to go teach fifth period. Okay. So this is a more realistic version of a demographic transition chart. Because there is a lot more conversation to it. Again, the previous one was just showing you overall trends. There is the possibility, the only way you would really slide backwards on this, and I think your book refers to this, especially around phase one. Once you're getting towards the end of phase one, if something large like war or disease breaks out, the example they used was HIV/AIDS, that can slide you back to bringing your population down, more than likely having a negative socio and economic impact on your population, and as a result of that, you could go back into declining or less. I can't think. High childhood death rates. And that would then bring those birth rates up again to try to compensate for that, because you're not going to grow your population. But just like we saw with some other populations like the moose or something from Royal Island, you can see those oscillations that are going to occur where the balance between the resources that human beings have and sustaining their population, you kind of can't get it there. And there might be some attempts to get some more help for certain populations so that they can have successful births. Those kids are going to make it through childhood, but they're just still not going to totally make it up to reproductive age. And then you're going to see those slumps again. So you can't have those oscillations that are going to occur as you slide back and forth with phase one. Phase two can also have these little oscillation bumps. Sometimes you do have a lot of people that are going to emigrate that you need to consider. So then your numbers are going to come down. So there might be some benefits, either maybe some government like tax incentives for having more kids, or the trends that we're seeing in Norway and Italy and the United States, where it's just kind of trendy now to maybe have 4 kids because you can, and it's interesting, and you have the resources and the affluence to do so. But you still see the importance that if you are entering into phase two, those death rates are going to come down first, and your birth rates are going to then follow, usually towards the end of phase two. But that's that real big decline of your birth rates to chase the death rates decrease is what's going to move you into phase three. And then once you start to see your populations leveling off, that's when you're going to start to enter into that phase four with your birth rates. Again, technically, and I'm going to go back to this, it is possible that your death rates could exceed your birth rates, and that's going to then talk about replacement fertility versus like a negative replacement fertility where you're just having less kids and they're not replacing you in the population. Family planning is a word that really comes down to when you want to have kids, any kind of birth control methods that you might use, either surgically or chemically, or just like a physical blockade, or other methods for that. Typically, again, when females have the ability to be educated to the point where they could have like an actual, like what we would consider a job or a career that they were trained to do, that they would leave the home to do and make an income for the home. Most women are going to hold off on having kids, and then her window of biological reproductive activity is going to narrow. So when you start to see in the orange higher levels of secondary or higher education, high school is secondary education versus elementary school is primary education, where you basic reading, basic math, which is what some people only get in certain countries based on their education, based on their gender, or based on their location, and just based on what their if they're a phase one or a phase two where you just don't have public education available, you just can't make it there. So secondary education is high school, and then anything after that is post-secondary, which we would consider college or tech school or trade school, community college, things of that nature. And then, of course, you have postgraduate work, which is after you've graduated from usually a 4-year program that you go on to like a master's or a doctorate or PhD, whatever you want to call it. But looking in Egypt, where you have a relatively high secondary education, then women are only going to have around 2.9 kids, so right between the 2 and the 3 mark. Whereas for those that are uneducated, again, it seems to be a society that values education for their women. So maybe if there's no education for that woman, she's having between 3 and 4 kids. Whereas if you flip that script going up to Ethiopia, there is just not a lot of women that are having some level of education past maybe even just a basic education. So she is going to be having like 6 kids. Whereas if you do have someone who is able to go on it and learn a little bit more, then she's going to pull that way back to 2 kids. So some real big obvious numbers there, which just leads you, or differences in numbers, which just leads you into the discussion of what is the difference between Ethiopia and Egypt and the role of the female, and is that changing? And in a lot of countries over the last 50, 60 years, that the role of the female has changed. And that includes the United States. If you think back like 1950s, the expectation of women, and now the expectation of women, and then the role of men. And so there's a lot of social sciences and social studies within that. Okay. This is a conversation that we are going to continue to have, looking at developed versus developing countries. Remember, developing countries typically are going to be on that phase 2, maybe trying to move into phase 3, whereas your developed countries are going to be solid phase 3s, potentially even your phase 4s, depending on if they're where they're at, but they're going to be considered developed countries as well. Human population size, China clearly going to be a developing country, lots and lots of people there for multiple reasons. Same with India. The next highest superpower is kind of us, considered a developed country. And some people would really argue this with China, saying China's a developed country at this point, but they still have a lot of agricultural areas that are still sustenance farming. So they have a bigger population of that than we do in the United States. But look at our numbers, how quickly we have brought our population under what I would say control, but we also don't have the land of China as well. So again, a lot of conversations happening. But if you, and then moving over here to Japan, which has a very low population. However, they are considered a developed country, but again, they're an island. And then coming over here, then looking at ecological footprints. So as small as we are as a leading or the leading developed country, we make a lot of pollution. We really do impact our environment because of our affluence. So thinking about in developing countries, there are some environmental problems. I apologize for my capitalization issues here. You have problems with sanitation and waste disposal. You have high levels of disease transmission because you can't get your dirty water out and clean water in because you just don't have that level of infrastructure, because you're going to be at that phase 1, phase 2 level where you just don't have it. You don't have the transportation systems for it. You don't have the people there to build those types of technologies and run them. You might not have the energy sources available for that. Soil depletion, because you're not farming in an industrial level. You're farming to possibly just use whatever that area has, and then you nomadically move on, or you graze your animals past once you've decimated an area. You just have to take your animals and your people with you. And that would be nomadic, or, there's another word for it, and I'll think of it when we get there. But it would be nomadic, or like you move a lot. In Mongolia, they have a whole system about how they move, but they do a little bit better with balancing their resources there. But people will use up resources until they have to leave, and then they'll move on to a place and use those resources up. In developing countries, though, we do have a lot of habitat destruction, overharvesting, problems with invasives, both plants and animals, bacteria, molds, funguses, pollutions of all kinds. And we really start to move not just into the water pollution and the soil pollution and things like that, but like industrial pollution, e-waste, and all of that material has to go somewhere if we're not managing it well. And unfortunately, areas that will pay us to take our crap that we should be able to deal with, a lot of those are going to be your developing countries. And we'll talk about that when we talk about solid waste pollution. Massive amounts of energy use on our end, looking at where we fall, it's unreal. Looking where India falls, considering how many people they have per capita, per person, how little or how much China distributes any of their environmental inequities to their population because they have so many people. I'm not saying that they're necessarily better than us, but per person, we look kind of piggish for everything that we have. But the one big caveat to that then is that, but we have the technology to fix it. We clearly have allocated a lot of resources for our affluence to give us the lifestyles that we do and the longevity for our population, the stability of our population, the choices we can make with our education and our healthcare and our child planning. And we have the technology and the money to fix this. We have the people to do this as well. What are we doing considering our place on the planet as an economic power, but also the amount of resources that we are taking? This is the question of where the United States should fall in terms of environmental advocacy and progression and technology. Places like Germany, France, the Norway, those types of countries, even big parts of South America, Canada, they've really jumped on board with some pretty big climate impacts or climate negotiations and treaties, sequestering carbon management, carbon emission management. And the question is then, where's the United States in this? Because if we're making a lot of these problems, why aren't we fixing them? This is really nothing that we're going to have to get into. Just the more affluent you get, the more you get towards those phase 3 and phase 4s on that demographic transition, you're simply using more energy and more stuff. And so how do you balance that out within how you are protecting those areas? Because that doesn't go on forever. And when we take more, others get less. Okay, and there's your review questions should you need them.